Welcome to Unfamiliar Territory, an anime podcast hosted by two white dudes who've been friends for over 15 years. We talk about the history and influence of anime, as well as review anime new and old, believe in the stars, and sail away for the future into unfamiliar territory.
My name is Grant.
And I'm Brantley. Heads up, spoilers on the way. Check the description, see if you're safe to listen. What are you laughing about?
I thought you had the opening. So
no, I do, but I was like, go ahead. Like, I mean, what are you laughing about?
Just on Kinji Nakamura's My Anime List thing.
Yeah.
The picture that they have is him doing the bird go pose.
Oh.
And just like off the corner of this picture is just a Pie Man plush. So it's just like very...
Is it ominous, or is it just kind of like...
or
is the plush a little lopsided or something? Like
I'll send you the picture. But it's just like half of Pie Man's face just off frame.
Oh, yeah. That feels like something that would happen in the show.
Yes.
Okay. So last time on Unfamiliar Territory, we did review Gatchaman Crowds, and we liked it quite a bit. Like I had already watched it and rewatched it then with Grant, and so I just kind of confirmed, yes, I really like it a lot. But Grant liked it too, which I was happy about. So why not? We're just gonna, keep running with it, basically. So, I mean, it's been a while since our last recording. We've been busy and stuff. And we've actually, started watching some other things in the meantime, but, this review, right now has always been Insight.
Oh,
Gatchaman
my
Crowds Insight.
Fucking God.
It's
that's
review.
nothing. That's nothing.
Well, they don't pay me.
No, they don't. They shouldn't.
Okay. So Gatchaman Crowds Insight is the sequel series to Gatchaman Crowds. It's same cast, just it's a direct sequel, which they did, a few years later. Yeah, we have a little time skip.
It's like a couple months, maybe a year.
And we get introduced to some new characters. It's a good time. Obviously, we're gonna go through this, so I don't know why I'm like expositioning so much.
It's how you do reviews. You exposition. You tell people that you like something, and you explain why they like it. So if they disagree with you, they can immediately start talking shit about you in the comments and not listen to the rest of it.
That's true.
I mean, that's just how you do it.
Yeah. This is also where you might put like a sponsored ad, so that way people go, oh, I don't want to hear the ad, and they skip further, and when you know it, they're now further into the video, and so they've sunk more time into it. So
yeah, exactly, and that's just all we care about is views and hits.
Yeah, this is a lot of metric talk, considering that we also just made a joke that we don't get paid for this.
So Gatchaman Crowds Insight, it's not as good as the first one. I have some qualms, some nitpicky stuff about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some art direction that I think is a little bit strange, but it's still worth checking out.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's unique.
Yeah, I'd say if you're like, what is this? What is Gatchaman Crowds and Insight? Go watch our first review, the episode before this one. And if you go and you like that show a lot, then you'll probably enjoy this show about as much or a little less. Because it's an interesting scenario in which things were tied up very well in the first season. And so as this season is a follow-up to that, everything has to take place in what is essentially a bit more of a de-escalated, situation. Like in fiction, they kind of solved a big problem, and now there's not really like a bigger problem to replace it. Instead, it's just something about equal scale or lesser. Which again, like if you think about this in sort of world building terms, I think that's kind of interesting. But we're just talking about like stimulus and how much arousal you're going to get out of this, then
don't use the term arousal.
It's strictly Look, arousal means just like it's a general term. Anyways.
Yeah, I know it's a general term, and so is erect. But if I tell you, if I use the word erect for anything, everyone's immediately gonna go.
Okay. Let's keep this going. How many other words can we just misuse?
Wow, the joke died immediately.
Well, that's okay because now we can actually review this show.
So the show has the same Gatchaman as the first one.
Mm-hmm.
You have Hajime, who is still stupid.
Love Hajime.
But maybe not as stupid as you're led to believe. She has a couple moments in the show where she does some waxing poetic stuff that's really neat, and of course, she's always right.
Yes, that remains consistent in this season.
She's never wrong. She doesn't learn anything because she doesn't need to learn anything.
Mm-hmm. She's just on top of it.
We have Pie Man, who has sort of embraced this mascot character thing he has going for him, and he opens up a daycare.
Yeah, Paimon's gone full in on like protect the children kind of mode, which is interesting for plenty of reasons. But yeah,
Tsutsu is a Tsutsu. I don't like how they do Tsutsu in this show. It's not that they did her dirty. They just kind of they shoot her away, and they're like, "You got your character arc where you learn to like other people besides OD. Go sit this one out."
She's mainly on the sidelines, yeah. And like, granted, a lot of the old cast, they're not getting new arcs, but Utsutsu also doesn't really play a big opinion into any of the political arguments that get brought up in the show. And so, like, while Paimon might step in and sort of make his, like, for the kids argument, and kind of get involved, Utsutsu mostly is just gonna, sort of stay off to the side, out of the argument, kind of uncomfortable about things. And so I think that has an impact on, how much, involvement time she gets as a character. She does sort of campaign alongside Paimon, where she's kind of like his assistant as he goes around and does some like lobbying sort of for a while. But again, that's a case where she's just kind of she's helping, but she's still on the sidelines. So I totally get that.
Sugane just gets a harem of women. That's his entire character arc.
Yeah, I don't know if he's supposed to be like in college or something now, but like
he is.
Okay.
He's a university student. That's why he gets drunk with Joe.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's basically got he's got a cluster of honeys that follow him around, just like think he's so cool. He's got a posse, basically.
Yeah. He does a cool sword thing at one point.
Yep.
That's about it.
Yeah, Joe is still Joe, but Joe is as like one of the government workers in the show, has more to do when things start campaigning and we get into like the political top speed of the show's like early to middle arc.
Joe gets to take a lot of L's in this one too. He continues his streak.
He always does, yeah.
Just never winning a fight.
He's the coolest dude with the most weapons, and he almost never gets to take the W. There's something poetic about it.
Birdcats is inside Hajime. He gets to say some mean things to her, and she just tells him to shut up.
Yeah, he literally lives rent-free inside of Hajime's head now. And
it's weird because they don't do much with it.
I think they do, but
it's like,
go ahead.
Well, the thing about it is that Hajime doesn't react to it at all. So he just says things, and she says, "Shut up."
No, and there's times where she's like, "No, Birdcats is right on this."
Like once.
Yeah, but then also like, at the same time, Birdcats is just sort of a symbol of the most chaotic dissent, or
The-
like it's sort of like meaningless anarchy almost, where it's just like let's be so impulsive and just say whatever we want and do whatever we want, and who cares? And so Hajime is like, enough of that. And that sort of then helps balance things out, I think, because it takes the heat off of any other one Gatchaman from being sort of the bad guy in the situation. When they have like the political arguments as a team, you'll always have Birdcats who's on the very, very, very far extreme side of the argument, just kind of like being shit. And so I think Birdcats is serving a narrative purpose, albeit it's not one that again is like particularly strongly character driven, right? Like, or developmentally interesting.
Yeah, fair. They say some cool lines, but I don't know. I find Birdcats to be barely relevant. But you got 12 episodes and have 12 main characters, so
Birdcats is kind of comic relief to an extent. To just pop in and call people shitty bitches and stuff. Which honestly, maybe this is lowbrow of me, but it does get me almost every time, so that's something. We'll get around back to Birdcats when we're talking about plot, I think.
OD becomes a political commentator on a news show.
Yeah, daytime talk show host, like guest star, basically. Kind of a representative for the Gatchaman for a while. And
then the show forgets that he exists.
Well, like literally the talk show writes him out. Basically, they're like, all right, OD is not really like OD is posing opinions that the new popular guests, which we'll get to in a moment, are like against. Like there's like a conflict there. So since OD is less popular, let's just remove OD. OD also is still strictly on the track of not transforming and not participating in fights. After like the finale of season 1, basically OD is for crime fighting and intents and purposes is spent. So yeah, mostly OD will pitch in some of the discourse that happens in the team, but plays a smaller role, you know.
Yeah.
And I think we're finding the pattern here where a lot of the main cast is playing like a reduced role, because we do have some new main characters, including new Gatchaman. One more to squeeze in. Rui's still around. Rui does have like a fairly significant role at the beginning of the show
and the end, but
yeah, it's kind of a valley of that. Rui officially has a Gatchaman form now. And that's neat. Rui has like a teleporting power, and
a car.
And yeah, also Rui has a self-driving car. No comments on that. But anyways, I think that's neat. To something that I brought up in the first season's review, I thought I misremembered that Rui was like presenting male more often in this season, and that doesn't really turn out. I just misremembered it altogether, which is neat. You get to see a lot of Rui presenting femininely, and then the times when Rui's not, it's like the usual when Rui's at home, when Rui's not sort of putting on a second identity as load and that kind of thing. So okay, so I think that's basically
that's the OG characters.
Yeah.
That's probably all we're gonna talk about them for the most part, because they don't do a lot.
If we talk about them, it'll probably be me putting my foot in somewhere to talk again.
So our new best buddy is Tsubasa Misudachi, who is a country gal that gets angry at people and becomes a very strong believer in absolute authoritarian government. Just right off the bat. It's interesting because Tsubasa doesn't really play the protagonist role. She's almost an antagonist in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She has her heart in the right place, but she reminds me of me when I was a teenager trying to figure out politics, where, like, she's easily sort of swayed towards, like, definitive opinions, things that sort of help simplify instead of complexify the context, and kind of, like, willing to let someone speak for her if that aligns well with her, and I think that's interesting. She's almost like a polar opposite to Hajime, because Tsubasa for a large amount of the show, it kind of feels like she's wrong all of the time, whereas Hajime was right all the time. You know, and I don't think it makes Tsubasa a worse character. Depending on what kind of viewer you are, you might find her annoying. I know I did the first time I watched it. But she plays a major part in, like you said, kind of being like this, like, pseudo antagonist, based on, like, what her political beliefs are, and how she, like, champions them, basically. It's interesting. But yeah, she's the new Gatchaman. Hooray! Her biggest sort of character arc is that she can't transform on command, which I feel like is probably meant to demonstrate that she doesn't really have things figured out yet. And she's not entirely sure how to sort of live and act on her own.
Which is wild to me, because I totally don't remember that being a character arc. I do not remember that being a plot point.
Yeah, I had forgotten it the first time I watched it as well. Because no other Gatchaman that we had seen before this season ever had an issue with that.
And it's not even super relevant, because Tsubasa quickly abandons being a Gatchaman.
Right.
Until, like, the end.
Exactly. There's, like, one or two moments where she wants to transform and can't. But it happens whenever she sort of takes things into her own hands instead of waiting for someone else to tell her what to do. Or in another way, kind of like she almost has, like, a rebellious streak going on where if someone's like, no, don't do that, she will do it. And that's another, I guess, interesting facet of her character. It's at least something that makes me think. Whether or not it's, executed cleanly or an entertaining way really is going to, your mileage will vary. And I'd say, like, probably Grant and I would disagree a little bit on her character execution. But that's what she...
disagree on anything. I'm gonna buy the book. I'll follow the path, stay on the right, go with the flow kind of guy.
Are you now?
So the next character
would you like to elaborate that?
Nope. is Gelsadra, our antagonist. Shrug. Gelsadra is an alien who comes to the Earth because also Gelsadra as a lot of as Gatchaman likes to do, has a fluid gender.
Yeah.
Aliens do not subscribe to the concept of human
Binaries.
gender.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, Gelsadra comes down, presents female, maybe young male, not really clear.
They call Gelsadra she at the beginning, yeah.
Oh, okay, so they call Gelsadra she. And then Gelsadra decides that she wants to run for president. And so becomes a male, presents as a male, like an old
grows up, yeah.
Yeah, like, hey, look at me. And Gelsadra can read emotions, has a high insight check. Got to bring back the ultimate game master from the Danganronpa. But high insight check, able to just read everyone's emotion, except for, of course, Hajime, because it's Hajime.
And Tsubasa's dad.
Or Grandpa?
Grandpa, sorry. Yep. Grandpa.
So Gelsadra comes to Earth, Everybody loves him or her or them. And
Yeah, I'll probably try to refer to Gilsadra as them, just because when we're going to talk about Gilsadra's character from point A to point B, there's probably going to be stuff that, like, applies at the beginning and the middle and the end of the season. And so because it's almost multiple characters. Gilsadra almost feels like a different character in different parts of the season, but like pre and post transformation and that kind of thing. So I'll probably generalize today, unless it's very specific, in which I can say like Gilsadra as she at this point and Gilsadra as he at that point. So
yeah,
we'll end up sort of adjusting based on the context or the point in the show we're at.
Yeah. So Gilsadra becomes the Prime Minister of Japan, and which is weird because at the end of Gatchaman Crowds, they kind of established a pretty consistent stateless society. But everyone was a little worried that the crowds were hanging out. They were like, hey, these crowds could probably fuck some shit up. Maybe we should ban them. And the Japanese parliament's like, I don't know what to do. What do we do? And they just shrugged their shoulders until an alien came to town. So they all vote Gilsadra to be the new prime minister. And Gilsadra, using the power of emotion reading, is able to find that people are very uncomfortable making decisions for themselves. And so they use the app, the Crowds app, to vote on things, like a digital democracy, right? Where everybody gets their vote, they get to press a button, and they get to decide. But eventually people get a little, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. So they add a third option, which is let Gilsadra decide. And then everyone just starts letting Gilsadra decide things. And because of that, the Gatchaman don't know what to do, because on one hand, everybody is voting for Gilsadra and voting for Gilsadra to make decisions. On the other hand, Gilsadra keeps eating their emotions, and giant bears start to show up. And if you don't agree with Gilsadra, then they eat you.
You're not dead, you're just absorbed.
Yeah, you get absorbed, because
also,
if you're not...
the creatures that the thought bubbles turn into, they're kind of like cartoony, blobby things with like big mouths and no eyes. They're kind of like very basic shaped creature things, which I only want to explain because if you haven't seen the show and what it looks like, just Grant describing that they turn into bears. It's a very different image for, say, walking around like the Japanese city environment.
Yeah, no, they look like bomb pops, the popsicles.
Yeah,
and their silhouette is bear, but they have no eyes and they have a long tongue, and they make me uncomfortable.
Yeah,
I would not want to see them, but everyone loves them because they're super helpful. It's interesting. So Tsubasa just simps so hard for Gilsadra. Just, I need this person to be the prime minister because I love them. Not in like a romantic way, but in a almost cult leader way. Gilsadra accidentally makes a cult. Yeah. And that's the thing that about this show. Gilsadra is the antagonist in the sense that they're not doing anything malicious. It's never on purpose. It's just how it happens. Mm-hmm. And so the topic is interesting, and I think they do a good job at it. I find it very Gatchaman that they make Gilsadra kind of like an unwilling antagonist. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I think that kind of dilutes the message of what Gilsadra is supposed to represent. But we can argue about that in themes.
Yeah, I think that what's interesting about this season is that unlike season 1, in which like Bird Cats is pretty clearly like Bird Cats is directly hurting people, but in this season, aside from the character we definitely skipped over, we need to come back to, which is the head of Vape, Rizumu Suzuki.
Yeah, because they introduced this character.
Hold on, wait. Okay, let me get this really quickly out. What we have in this season is like sort of a slow slide into authoritarianism, which is way different than just kind of like the chaos and danger of the first season. The first season is like, oh, Bird Cats is causing people to get hurt. That's pretty clearly a bad thing. But here, the responsibility of who is getting who hurt is diffused, and there's this like air of willingness, that people are consenting to essentially what starts becoming a toxic environment. And I think that's why is and is not an antagonist kind of applies to Gelsadra and to Tsubasa and, everybody who's in on this. So, yeah. Should we roll back to Suzuki for a moment? Because Suzuki does make up, like, the first, 3 or 4 episodes of conflict.
Yeah, like, Suzuki's whole entire thing is he, first off, is a medical student, not even a doctor, and he's already, like, Gatchaman does not like characters being over 23. But they also don't use a lot of, like, that. Most of the characters are adults. But Suzuki is like, fuck crowds, get it out of here. I think all humanity is just apes, which is biologically kind of true. Primates. But he's like, they should not have the control of the world because they're all violent. Very, very hard opinions from this gentleman. Mm-hmm. He has a note the same way that the Gatchamans do.
Mm-hmm. Bird Cats pulled it out of him, I think, and then he just hadn't been using it yet, and now he is.
And so it's weird because he kind of represents the I'm gonna pull the strings and I'm going to make sure that people know that crowds is bad, but you forget that he exists half the time.
I think he's like Mess from the first season, where like he sets up the first big question of the series and then disappears because that needs, like, essentially that problem becomes its own societal thing, as opposed to him just being a dick to everybody the whole time. Yes. And so the way he instigates this whole season is through using an organized, malignant version of crowds, right? It's like, it's still crowds, but it's a bunch of people who are like working together to cause problems. So they're taking hostages, they're doing like, property damage, that kind of thing, in order to like essentially demonstrate, here's your tool, here's what it can do bad. And so like in a way, Suzuki and Vape kind of represent like what crowds could do better and what crowds can do worse. So like Suzuki rightfully points out, hey, crowds is unorganized. Like, there's no like, strong backbone to what any one user does. Individualistically, you could be a lot more, or you're not as effective as you could be. And so like, look at what we can do, when we have this small batch of users who is like in concert. But then at the same time uses that to just be like, and by the way, we're going to fuck a bunch of shit up because we technically can. And so then that pushes back on the whole concept of crowds. And so like, they essentially steps in and says, hey, here's the worst faith take in this technological infrastructure, and gives it a push. And then everything has to sort of rebalance out and push back on Suzuki, as like a proof for the remainder of the season. And then we get into Gelsadra more. Gelsadra steps in and sort of, sees people aren't united, aka aren't organized, and then that begins the whole accidental cult thing, and it rolls from there.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, where did we leave off?
It's a show. What?
Where did we leave off? So we were talking about the Bears. Did we...
Yeah, and so we're just kind of finishing it.
Yeah.
And so Hajime is like, "Aw, man, we gotta stop Gelsadra. How are we gonna stop Gelsadra? Let's kill him on live TV." But let's not actually do that. Instead, I will use Birdcatz's power to transform into Gelsadra, and then you're gonna murder me on live TV. I think their plan doesn't make any sense because they immediately say, "We didn't actually kill Gelsadra. It was just to make you guys doubt yourself." Because their love for Gelsadra was so strong that it was fueling the. Well, I can't remember what they call the bear folk.
Oh, shoot! I forget their name too. Sorry.
Yeah, so,
you know that in its own right serves as part of this review. They're like, it either uses Geru or something.
It's Ku, Kuu.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Kusama,
so
right? So
Kusama.
I was almost gonna say Kurudu, but that's Precure.
It's Precure. So it's wild because they have to make it so that the unwavering love for Gelsadra goes away, and they do that by committing like a regicide. and the reason that it does is because the people voted. Because once the people found out that the Kusamas were, like, consuming people, they voted to let the Gatchaman handle it. And then when the Gatchaman started committing a regicide, they thought to themselves, well, maybe we shouldn't have voted to let someone else handle our problems.
Right.
And they immediately are like, we didn't do it. Instead, we killed Hajime. But Hajime doesn't die. Just goes comatose for a couple weeks, and then is brought back to life through the power of friendship and will, and also life drain.
Yeah.
and that's Gatchaman Crowd's insight. That's the story. There's not much else that happens that I can really think of. There's the talk show host, but Emilio, who kind of helps spreads the Gelsadra propaganda.
Yeah, it's kind of the catalyst element for the plot.
Yeah, and it's an interesting take, but I feel like the problem I have with Insight is there's so many things about this show that they're there for the sake of plot, and of course you have to have that, right? You can't just coast by on whatever, but because they don't have a lot of episodes, because it's really, really short and they have a lot to cover, I feel like some of the themes fall a little short. Not that it's bad. I did like the show, but there's some issues.
I would agree that it's very plot-focused. I think there's a lot of times where the characters sound a little bit less like themselves and sound a little more like stand-ins for like talking points. It sometimes can sound like the author is just like having a me and myself conversation that's being sort of assigned to the different characters in the Gatchaman squad, which I'm okay with. But at the same time, like, for example, I miss having Hajime as the front and center, like, main character and sort of, more of the character-driven stuff that she would do, You don't quite get as many of those precious moments as the first season where, like, you have, say, like, the scrapbook club that Hajime is part of. You don't really get stuff like that because it has to be so go on Gelsadra and Tsubasa. And that's where, like, when Grant says plot-centric, or that it's, like, it's very plot-heavy as opposed to themes or as opposed to characters. It's that, this the characters and the themes are vehicles for, like, here is a situation being played out, and it's very straightforward. Yeah, and your mileage will vary on that.
I know we talked a little bit about the character arcs, but I think some of them have a lot more to say. Most of the characters in the Gatchaman Crowd don't really do much. Joe, Sugane, Pieman, Itsu don't really change. They start in a position, they do the thing, and they're done. But I think Rui has a pretty interesting character arc that I think mirrors the themes that Gatchaman Crowds Insight wanted to do.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Okay.
So Rui's whole shtick is that he starts to believe that Crowds isn't worth it, right? And so he keeps talking to good old Suzuki about letting Gelsadra take over this role that Rui has put himself in, right? Mm-hmm. Rui is the brains behind Crowds. Mm-hmm. And because of that, there's a lot of responsibility on maintaining Crowds as a tool for good and a tool for helping people. Mm-hmm. And as Gelsadra slowly starts to rope more people into this cult of personality and this cult of basically like monarchism and an absolute leader, Rui starts to be very attracted to that because, one, there's some magic shit going on, and two, because it allows Rui to let someone else have responsibility.
Yeah, Rui gets to be complacent and sort of becomes pacified in this whole process,
which Rui doesn't like to do. Rui is never pacified in the entire first season. You know, he's go, cause conflict, try and save the world, and it's good. It's honestly really good. I think that Rui's character arc is the best out of the original characters. Mm-hmm. I think they used him in a really good way, and they used him to kind of make Suzuki a little bit more antagonistic. I think where it falls is that Suzuki barely does anything except talk about things.
After he is in jail.
Well, no, even after he's out of jail, he just kind of sits back and watches. It makes me feel like he was supposed to have a bigger part, but ended up not.
Yeah, when Suzuki is sort of out, right? When one of the members of Vape like essentially unlocks him from prison, Suzuki also has to face like yeah, this is more complex than I thought it was too. And like if you're for or against that, that's gonna modify how you feel like his role was spent. But to an extent, like Suzuki got to have his third of the season, and then basically after that, it's like for Suzuki to realize like, oh, maybe I was kind of misguided. Then I guess it makes sense for me why they benched him. Because in the writer's eyes, he actually did expend everything that he could have contributed as a character. Yeah, this is not a season that's cleanly split in half, just like Crowds season 1 was. Which Crowds season 1 was like very lopsided. You know, you had like 2 episodes dedicated to the mess aliens, and then they solved that immediately. And then Bird Cats is kind of on and off. You know, like and Crowds is kind of a thing that's like they're working out. And it's kind of Gatchaman versus Crowds for a while. Like season 1 is weird. Season 2 is a little more concentrated, but it has the disadvantage of Suzuki being a much stronger character than Mess ever was. And a much easier to understand antagonist than anybody else in this season. So I can understand this feeling of like, why did they not use Suzuki more? Yeah. When it comes to Rui, I also think it's interesting that we spend a lot of time at the beginning of the season with Rui like doubling and tripling down on Crowds, going like full idealist, right? Like to the point where Rui's almost killed by Suzuki for refusing to like basically stand down. Totally gives into idealism and wants to die for it before Tsubasa steps in. And so like for Rui to essentially, you know, have that fight taken from him and then to see things start playing out more normally and like, you know, everything starts getting easier under Gelsadra, everything starts becoming calmer, and that's all sort of while Crowds is absent. seeing Rui kind of spin into this like pacified role, I think is fascinating. And it's like compelling, I think. Even if it does, like, in very technical terms, mean that Rui is also another benched character in this already like large cast of benched characters.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's fine. I think the themes that Gatchaman Crowds insights are out there. They make sense. They're good. I just think they did them in a way that was a little upsetting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even to say that I crave the conflict, and there's not conflict in the show that's like outward conflict until like episode 8. I do crave conflict. I love it. But there's just a lot of times where they do a lot of bait and switches,
Mm-hmm.
where Bert Katz mentions that Gelsadra scares him, and you think that like, oh shit, how is Gelsadra gonna do this? And it's just like, oh, he's just so incompetently charming that he causes planets to get eaten, which is fine, but they immediately do another bait and switch where the Kusamas come right away, and it's like, oh shit, here it comes, and then they're friendly. Mm-hmm. They rely a lot on toying you along until something actually happens, and I got sick of it pretty quickly. The and like I said, I think that they could have done Gelsadra just a little bit better, but then maybe it wouldn't have been the same show, and maybe I would have disagreed with that and to start.
What would you have liked to see different out of Gelsadra?
I kind of wish that they were a little bit more malicious. I think, especially in today's political climate, and I know this came out before today's political climate, so it's not like they could see it, but a lot of authoritarians run on this idea of a cult of personality, right? Mm-hmm. Where they can do so much shit, but they're still going to be beloved and supported by people because of this cult of personality. And Gelsadra has it, but I think the idea that someone who has this kind of addictive personality that people want to hear won't use it to their own benefit, I think that kind of lessens some of the themings. And especially because the entire idea of Gatchaman Crowds Insight to me is, how does a society that is run by the people devolve back into like a traditional authoritarian ruler? Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting because, you know, it hits the mark, taking away responsibility from the people, because that requires self-reflection and self-betterment, and not everyone wants to do that. Making easy choices based on a concept that you hear once or twice and are okay with, and someone coming in and capitalizing on that want and then utilizing it to have power. That's really good. That's some really good themes. But since it's all Gelsadra doing it by accident, it's a little underwhelming.
Yeah, I suppose I really like the fact that they went full on nice act with Gelsadra, and or that Gelsadra doesn't have like a malicious, I was gonna say bone, but Gelsadra's clouds. Let's see. I like that Gelsadra doesn't have even a hint of like an Alex Jones Infowars, anything like that ever comes up, right? There's never this turnaround of like impassioned demand really that forms maliciousness, because I can imagine what that's like. I see it all the time, right? Like it's well within my creative ability to see like the heel turn, sort of. Like, been there, done that for me, sort of. Like, it does have a stronger historical precedence, for sure, right? And if we if we believe that this show is trying to make a statement, then yes, it would be probably more credible if they had some kind of like, you know, foulness about it. But I think it's to me it's far more interesting that we have this like toxic positivity sort of, where everyone is so sold on the idea of like conflict is bad, let's get along, that that you start excluding the people who don't make that easy. And that wouldn't really work as well if Gelsodra just started, suggesting like these people are causing disruption, you should punch them, or something like that. And I know that's not what you're really saying, but I feel like if there was, if we had, like even the slightest shift of like Gelsodra getting like evil, basically, then it would be any other plot, that like power corrupts. But here, that's not really the case. It's more messy in that, it's not so much of a corruption as it is everybody is attempting to, rationalize like discomfort as the newest unacceptable thing. And so they're continuing to slim down what is acceptable until this, like, Ouroboros eats itself entirely. And like I feel like that works in a more unique or novel way because they don't have that evil intent hidden in there somewhere. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I had to say about that. All of this is predicated on me not really getting as bothered by the dry spell in this show. Like, the fake outs do start to wear on me, but for whatever reason, I mentioned this in the season 1 review as well, like I have a very strong tolerance for this show's like pacing, I guess, like, and I have some rose-colored glasses when I watch it, for sure. It was one of the earlier anime I really got into. And I don't think I really understood it totally then, and because I feel like I understand it a little better now, then maybe that's why I'm more forgiving of it. But I guess when I hear about like, when I've been on like say Imager, or I hear people talk about Final Fantasy 14 and online communities that are like that sort of espouse themselves as very positive and very welcoming, but then inevitably kind of like lash out on itself at some point because it is trying to self-police, and inevitably comes back to discourse because there always has to be discourse, will always be different. I think that's what entertains me. To me, Gatchaman Crowds is about validating discourse, which maybe is is too narrow to look at it that way. But at the least, that's what I think a large middle portion of the show is about. To the point where sometimes it feels like Hajime's character kind of becomes that. The one panel of Tails Gets Trolled, where it's Tom from Tom and Jerry, and he says the let me find I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it because it's a
Welcome to Familiar Territory, where we reference the hit webcomic Tails Gets Trolled.
It's like, basically Hajime is like, did you know that even with seatbelts, people die all the time in car crashes? I thought that was interesting. It's just, it's that energy, right? Where she's like almost like purposefully poking and prodding at a lot of these like simple arguments that the cast is trying to make. She's kind of being shitty, right? Like, not entirely unlike what Bird Cats does. But the point being is she wants to show that like homeostasis can still kick in if you have disagreements or you have discourse, right? You can still like bring things steady again instead of just cutting out all the bad actors. I will say this. I know I've talked for a really long time, so I want to stop for a moment after this.
No, you can keep talking.
Is it clear that I like the show a lot? I think the one place that this show stumbles is that it's very into this idea of like, hey, we shouldn't exclude each other just because we don't agree, but also it still goes about incarcerating bird cats in a way and straight up with Suzuki. And so like the carceral logic element of this is still something that it hasn't resolved. Like, of course, they can't do everything all at once, but it definitely kind of conflicts with this idea of like, hey, you should be able to, like, we should be collectively able to work this out without necessarily like, restraining people down to, an inhuman level or like excluding them, right? Which incarceration is a method of that. So yeah, okay. That's the end of my tangent. And all that is
this whole podcast is tangents.
Yeah, it really is. We straight up we went from the character section into the review fluidly without even breaking there. So it really is, like all this, in theme of the show. I totally get where Grant comes from on this. And this is not me trying to
fucking bring the discourse.
No, like
Stop
that's what
it.
I'm saying, right? Like I'm okay with not having the same opinion on Grant on this as Grant.
Yeah. And that being said, I still think it's a worthwhile show. I still think it's cool. I still think it does stuff that not a lot of anime tackles.
Yeah.
It's still good. I just really liked the first season a lot better.
Yes.
And I think my problem is I like the theming and what they wanted to do. I just don't think they hit every single position that I wanted them to explore. But hey, there's a part where Joe is playing darts, and God love him.
You want to just like talk about some bits of the show we like?
Yeah.
I like that JJ's prophecies still happen, but that like now we have the recontextualization that like they're suggestions because they're not Gelsadra, right? It's not this like easy binary demand on like, hey, let's vote on this. Instead, JJ's making these kind of vague predictions as to what's going on, and how you interpret that will differ. There's a part where like Paimon gets frustrated, and it's just like, why can't JJ just make it easy on us? And this is coming to, around the same time where everyone's putting a lot of faith in Gelsadra. And I think that's neat, right? This show is a lot about like, who do you put your trust in? Do you put your trust in the sensational, talk show that airs all the time, or do you put your trust in the person who always agrees with you? Do you put your trust in the people with all the power, or like the charisma, or what, right? Or the good track record, so on and so forth.
I like that Gelsadra's UFO is a fidget spinner.
Yes, that also happens. I love that we are 2 for 2 with Gatchaman Crowds seasons in which it ends by Hajime being brutalized.
Yeah, they Hajime just gets her ass kicked. Well, and once again, the plan didn't really make sense to me then. Doesn't make sense to me now. But hey,
would you prefer that they don't ever reveal that Hajime was Gelsadra, or are you thinking of something else?
Yeah, it's weird because it's not like the Gatchaman could have murdered Gelsadra and been the hero still in the eyes of the people.
Right.
But it's also one of those things where if you're gonna fake someone's death, you don't need to make it that believable. Like, especially when you immediately reveal that you're lying, right? You could have done a lot of things to make it so that didn't happen, and then once the what do they call it, the atmosphere. I don't know if that's what they call it.
Yeah. They refer to it as the atmosphere.
Once that changes, they watched a fight on TV. You can fake that so easily, especially considering what they did.
But then there would have been insiders, there would have been...
I get it, but also I don't. It's a very convoluted way of doing that.
I think there's a great explanation for why you're for this. And the answer is that the person who came up with this plan is Hajime.
That's fair. I like the idea of a news show just peddling propaganda. That was done really well. I like that it wasn't even on purpose, but once OD started saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't listen to every single thing that Gelsadra says, they immediately kicked him off. That was cool. I like that Gelsadra is wildly known around the universe as like a planet killer. Because of what they do. Subasa's fun sometimes. I kind of wish we got more of her, weirdly enough. I felt that her entire character arc was basically just being there for Gelsadra. I just wish we got a little bit more of her being her, because she's fun in the first episode.
That's kind of her point. Like, the reason why she can't ever transform is that she's not taking things into her own hands. And so, like, essentially, her character is built in such a way that, like, her finishing to her arc is that she starts being her own person, which means that in the meantime, she's just a mockingbird for Gelsadra, which means, by extent, she's kind of boring. So that I think Insight has that issue, right? Where what it's trying to do is not very good entertainment. For them to actually illustrate this slow descent into authoritarianism, they show it slow. They don't skip. And so that means you're getting dragged along through a lot of people sort of like resigning from trying. And like, for example, at first it's like, oh, look, these politicians in Parliament are getting dunked on, but then it's like, oh, but they're really not doing anything now. Like, they're contributing nothing as opposed to contributing something positive. And so you have to be there for the times where it gets boring, according to this show's sort of, like, methodology, in a way. Yeah,
I get it. It's
doesn't make it good entertainment, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it also has a very fast ending. Despite the fact that they have basically they show you the whole ending sequence and then they redo it in full, which is yet another thing where this show will not cut corners on that kind of thing. They will take you through the whole thing again. This time narrated by Hajime, and you get to hear all the painful screaming and yelling. It feels really abrupt. Your conclusion to the show is that Hajime wakes up.
Yeah.
As opposed to, like, what's the prologue for the society? Yeah. And of course, like, for the things that I, was missing out of the first season, such as they talk about the world, but really what they mean is this one small area of Japan, is mainly still true here. Like, it's still extremely utopic. Like, everybody that they're sort of, showing in these, like, in the episodes and whatnot, like, is all, like, pretty much well-to-do people living in a pretty decent-looking city. There's, like, the civic problems that they're discussing in the halfway point of the show, is stuff like, like, for example, like, tax rates and healthcare and stuff like that.
Classic.
And so, like, and military budget cuts or police budget cuts, something like that. Which is, like, that's cogent for the situation, but there's the base level that they start at is very egalitarian. Like, everybody has a smartphone, so this voting system is A-okay. And that's all right, because in season 1, when we had to do the whole crowds thing, we gave everybody a cell phone as a governmental policy.
Right.
But like, there is no like, well, what about the people who were homeless and we couldn't find and pick out and get the cell phone to them? What about the people who can't use it, that kind of thing? Like, that stuff doesn't get addressed. It just kind of gets cleanly swept over. And so that still feels uneven. They didn't bother taking care of that in this season, because it wasn't this season's focus, but it's still I think something that I would have enjoyed seeing, perhaps a season 2 and this be a season 3 or that kind of thing. Clearly they've been radio silent on this series long enough that I don't think they're gonna bring it forward.
But who
so
knows?
C'est la vie, but yeah,
Weirder things have happened.
that's true. We're in like the reboot era right now, where just all sorts of odd ducks are getting brought back to the limelight. So yeah, legitimately anything can happen, I guess.
Do you have any final thoughts about the review? I feel like we've covered the themes for the most part.
Yeah, just the a collective's made of imperfect, partial individuals, and like if you lose that, in the independence and the organization of it, you don't really have the collective. You have to have individuals who also get along through their differences and by their differences, and their differences are valuable because that sort of forms the extents of what society ought to accommodate. And allows things to be interesting, right? There'll always be push and pull in this. I guess that this is recently relevant, just in the broad sense that like I've felt that sort of like impulse to be like, ugh, if only we could just, if only all the people who refuse to wear their masks would just leave, or like, it's this impulse to like secede or like separate, like if only all the bad actors would go over here and all of us, we could stay over here. Like, ultimately we can't do that. I don't really think that's the right way to go about things if I want to be idealist about it. And so I guess this show kind of it visualizes that, right? And how like, maybe even if we look to like more classical cases in warfare, for example, that it starts with the exclusion of one people, and then when that's kind of winding down, then who else do we blame? And it continues to cut itself down and down and down. Like that the fascist sort of drill down into how do we create a perfect race by cutting out what doesn't belong, quote unquote. So yeah, I think it's relevant. And of course the most important takeaway is that if you want to shock people back to reality and make them accept that they have to make decisions on their own, show them a snuff film on live TV. Oh, Hajime. Hajime would make a killing as like a film student, I think.
You never know.
Yeah. Literally never. This just never coming back. Okay, do you want to do some hypotheticals?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say that I'm wrong. And that Crowds does get a third season. What do you want it to tackle next?
I want it to tackle wealth inequality. I think that we would see people who have more free time because they're wealthier being able to utilize Crowds more, and they would become famous through the app.
Oh my god, valorized as like influencer heroes?
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
my god.
And so you see like specific Crowds people becoming more and more popular and doing less and less work, but because they're popular, they can do less work and then influence a lot more. And so the idea would be, how do we create an equitable society in which everyone can do the good and what they want to do without sacrificing their own personal lives?
Mm-hmm. I love that. I dig that. I think if I had the choice, I kind of want the Gatchaman gone. I mean, I already kind of felt that, like, say with first season. And I don't know if, like, that's a great decision, but I want to see what they do with it. Especially considering, like, they've established, like, Earth is just one place in a whole galactic scheme of stuff that's going on. And so far everything's kind of like, oh, something comes to Earth and causes a problem. So what happens when Earth is kind of on the galactic stage, so to speak? Maybe that would just get even more boring and political. Like, I suppose I wouldn't want to lose out on the characters that I know and like any more than we already have, just to pull like a Mass Effect, basically. But like, I think there's still some spicy places they can take this, right? Especially if, like, it's like, all right, you know, where do the Gatchaman still fit in if we keep making these improvements? Do we reach a point where eventually you do abolish the Gatchaman, and just let Earth be Earth? I don't know. I doubt they would ever do that because they already have a hard enough time showing anywhere else except Japan. But I don't know, maybe they'd make that leap. Okay. Last hypothetical. Ready for this?
Yeah.
Okay. So, now that we're here, at least I'll only speak for myself. It kind of feels like Gatchaman is, to me, it feels very at home with leftist story topics, right? Like, now when I think of Gatchaman, like, I don't think of the originals at all, you know, partially because I've never seen them, but also just like, it just seems like a good fit somehow.
Well, and you know, Kenji Nakamura has done various other anti-capitalist, anarchy-based stuff.
Yeah. So,
yeah, I'd agree.
Mm-hmm. So now it feels like, you know, like, oh yeah, this works. It doesn't feel odd. So what if you had to get that same sort of, like, yes, this totally matches kind of feeling, but you don't get to make a leftist story, Grant. No. You have to take an IP and spin it into a pro-neoliberal show.
I would make fuck. All right, I'm trying to think.
I was a little concerned. You seemed really ready right there. I was like,
well, I
was 2 seconds away from being extremely impressed and scared.
Well, what I was going to say is I would make Precure. I would get rid of all the shtick about friendship, right?
Oh my god, Precure!
Well,
no,
no,
Precure is close already.
Yeah, the joke was I was going to turn Precure neoliberal, but Precure's already kind of neoliberal, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's okay to be different. It's okay to, you know, be friends with whoever, but the don't change the status quo and make sure that the person with the most money is still at least in control. Everyone can have a little bit of Precure, but the Precure has to be the biggest Precure. So honestly, Precure's already pretty neoliberal. I would take Speed Racer, okay? Relevant to what we're doing. I'd take Speed Racer, right? Speed Racer's already kind of just like a wucky 1960s anime, but I'd make it so that there is inequality amongst the racers, right? Like, oh, Speed gets to use his Mach 5 so that he can race the fastest, and so Speed, using his privilege, continues to win races so that other people who have less privilege than him lose, but they're all equally worse than Speed, thus creating an equitable society where Speed Racer is the deciding factor. Just like how neoliberals believe that if we have a free market capitalist with some safety nets, everyone will eventually be at least a little bit capitalist. They might not be the best capitalist or in charge of anything, but they'll be better than if we were a fascist dictatorship. And that's how you would turn Speed Racer into a neoliberal show.
Can we still keep the judo throws and the random?
Oh, 100%, 100%. You don't have. I mean, you'd have to take away the firearms because neoliberals don't like the proletariat having guns. So take away the firearms, only give them to cops, but make it so that the cops aren't our friends. But like, what else are you gonna do?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're not gonna not have cops.
Cop.
No, they'll have guns because you can't not have cops. What are you gonna do if we take away the cops? How are we going to stop crime, Brantley? So the cops need to be in there. They have guns, but Speed doesn't have a gun. Speed does not have a gun, and they never shoot a person, and they just constantly call the cops on people.
How fast are the cop cars compared to the racing cars?
Very fast, because that's where all the tax money goes.
Oh my god. Okay. By the way, Familiar Territory does not support or condone neoliberalism. Hopefully that's evident from everything we've talked about before this. But, like, just in case you're this deep and you're just coming back to it now, let's put that on the bottom line. Okay, here's mine. I need you to picture this.
Okay.
Okay, you have 4 talented kids from across Japan.
Yep.
They're homeschooled in stunt acting, law, ancient history, and fashion. Okay, each one of them, right? Those are their specialties. Right. So for the stunt actor kid, his father gets injured. This is their backstories. Okay, so his father gets injured because he's also a stunt actor, and he's being bled dry on government mandated Medicare. And by the way, I prepared this. Like, this is not me on the spot, so don't give me too much credit. I had too much fun coming up with this prompt, apparently, and that's a bad thing. The law studying kid, they're growing up and they see injustice in the world, but they can only enforce the rules. They can't change them, and they're grappling with that. And you have the historian who wants to teach about the nation's glory days and of the noble samurai, but instead they have to go by the books on international current events. And the fashionista, she wants to empower the women of the world with bold new styles, but her mother's small business is suffering from a lack of seed money. And so together, they join up and become an unlikely team to rob the government elite and give back to the private sector. Neo Lupin the Third.
God. Did you come up with the pun first?
No, I was
and then
like,
work
what,
backwards.
What would be a travesty? And I thought, okay, Lupin the Third's supposed to be some kind of Robin Hood-esque thing. Like, there's still like criminals, but like
the cool kind of criminals.
Yeah, the ones that say funny, cool things and make funny jokes and kill people incidentally. Then it was like, how do I turn each one of these character archetypes into some kind of bastard?
And then they go to brunch and they go, if only we could change this.
Exactly. And then the name came last.
Wild, because it's a good pun. All right, I have 0 things to say now. I'm done.
You're all Gatchaman'd out.
I'm Gatchaman'd out. What's our next show we're watching?
I don't know. We have to kind of decide. Like we've been redabbling into Madoka because we've been, showing that around to some new people we know, and so therefore that's kind of on the brain. And Magia Record just finished off its specials to sort of cap off season 2 / become season 3, so that's out there. We started watching more Tante Opera Milky Homes because there's something wrong with us, I guess.
It's awful.
It's not good. But we're following through.
Pretty miserable, to be honest.
Yeah. We've had the Review Starlight movie on hold for like ever, and I think it's probably finally a decent time for us to like check that out. But then again, that's one of those we have in the pocket for like a bad day, I think. It's like we need a pick-me-up, and that's almost definitely going to be something we like, I think. So I don't know what exactly we'll do next, but it'll probably be magical girl stuff and not a fourth unfamiliar territory episode in a row.
My theory, my personal theory of what's going to happen is we're going to watch Rebellion, the Madoka Magica movie, and then we can do a Maho Amaho on how to make a good sequel / spinoff, using Rebellion as the positive and Magia Record as the negative.
Yeah, between the last Magia Record review we did and now, I started picking up on people saying that the anime of Magia Record is also divergent from the gacha game, apparently, and they're not happy about that. So it seems just kind of like everybody's unhappy with it, which is really great justification considering where we put season 2 on our tier list. Go watch our tier list. Yeah, so I guess that's probably where we'll go next. And wherever it does go, I guess we hope to see you then for the next review.
Well, thank you for listening to our review of Gatchaman Insight. You can go check out our tier list, like Brantley said, which was our last episode. Kind of gives you a lowdown on how we here at Familiar Territories rank things. You can check us out on twitch.tv/familiar territory.
Oh my god, I forgot!
Huh?
The music in Insight's really good, still.
Oh yeah, it fucking slaps.
Okay, now you can continue with this instinct.
Where we stream video games that we want to play. These range from Sonic Adventure games to fighting games to visual novels. So come check us out. See, you might like what we're watching, and we have a friendly chat that can talk to you about shit, and it's great. You can follow me on Twitter, where I talk about Praxis and anime girls and how they talk. Or you don't need to do any of that, because we are not your dads.